In today's video, I want to address sliding lid box lids that are stuck or not closing well. About once a year, I make a lot of boxes and I make them all year long. So I make some over the winter. At least once a year, I'll have one that I made in the dead of winter that in the spring or summer, I find that it doesn't open as well. Sometimes it is literally almost shut. But most of the time, it's just a little shut. I could push this back in, but it takes force. I don't want my box to require force to get the lid in, so I have to deal with that. Now I'm just going to say up front, there are two different types of stuck. Stuck due to width, you made the lid too wide and it has expanded, and stuck due to groove height, and it's probably because the lid either cupped, well, it's almost certainly because the lid cupped and now it's pressing up and you can't pull the box out. If you have a width problem and you need to get it out, it's a little tricky. For either of them really, what I suggest is grab something soft, take this lip right here, and clamp this down, and then if it's a width problem, you're going to need to kind of wiggle it out back and forth. If it is a stuck due to cup problem, we need to actually usually push this down as much as we can because we're getting pressure here, here, and here, and this will allow us to go down and out. All we have to do is get that 1/4 inch and it will release. There may be some refinishing involved with the lid, but I like to minimize how much refinishing I have to do with the box itself, so hence why I use this, and I press it down. If it's a cup and I pull it out, if it's a width issue, you got to wiggle. Sometimes it doesn't want to come out if it's a width issue. I learned this years ago, which is why I always make mine a little small width-wise. They're a little loose in the winter, but in the summer, I never have the width problem. That one is harder to solve in terms of getting it out. It's very easy to solve once you get it out, but getting it out can be really tricky. If need be, just wait. It'll probably eventually, a week later, sometime when it's less humid, get a little looser and try again. You could also try sticking the box in the fridge, I guess, or if you have a dehumidifier, put it somewhere near a dehumidifier and perhaps it loosens just enough to get it out. But we have to get the lid out to fix it. So let's get the quick one out of the way. If it is a width issue, this is very simple. All of this involves material removal, massaging of material to remove some. If it's a width issue, you just have to simply remove width. I generally advise taking a roughly even amount off of each side. I just grab the random orbit sander, I throw on some 150 grit or 60 grit even, and I just go at it, testing it every few seconds. You usually don't have to remove too much, but I'm testing it each time until I eventually get enough removed. Now, that leaves one issue. That will be this little area here. We don't want to ram the sander up against this or it will create a little divot and it just won't look good. So you'll end up with the random orbit sander removing everything up till about that point. That's when you turn to the chisel. I highly suggest if you have a vise, putting something soft around this, or if you have a clamp, putting something soft around it, clamping it, then clamping the clamp down, and just going in with a chisel and slowly, delicately removing whatever is left, and then it will slide right back in. At the end of that, I highly suggest going back and just kind of lightly rounding all of the edges over. And also while you're there, make sure there's nothing else that's keeping it stuck and that it is just a width issue, because once you've got it out, we'd rather deal with all of it right now. But that's pretty simple. You only have to kind of refinish the sides a little bit, add some more oil, whatever, and you're done. On to my problem now. I have a cupping problem right now. This board has cupped. It's the downside of using solid wood across a wide lid at a kind of relatively thin thickness. It's going to occasionally, in the heat of summer, I live in the Midwest, cup. Now there are 3 areas we generally have to deal with here. I mostly build mine with the cup up. I think it generally looks better than having kind of a hollow in it when you're from the top. So that means usually this back area here that slides into this groove, as well as these 2 areas right here and right here. Those are usually the pressure points. I'll bring you in closer and I'll show you, because those are the exact pressure points here on this box, and it's the most common of the ones that I have to fix. Now, a good way to test this is to grab a piece of paper. We should at least be able to get a piece of paper to slide in. You can see nicely on either side I'm going in, and then in the middle I'm not getting in there because it's cupped. So we will have to do some material removal between that area roughly. And then if we spin this around, I'm not going to shove this back in because I got it out and it wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but I can't get computer paper under there, which means material needs to be removed from this area. And then if we flip it around, I've got the same problem over here. That's generally how I identify the problem spots is, can I slide a piece of paper under it? If I can, then that is probably not a problem spot. Now, just because we have 3 problem spots, that doesn't mean solving one may not solve the whole thing. I generally like to start with the easier one, this back area right here. I just grab the random orbit sander and I attack this kind of 1/4 inch about there. That's how deep this groove is. And I just kind of sand it down and round it over. Whatever it is will be hidden inside of there anyways, and you'll never notice. It'll just have kind of a nice rounded over. It will feel good in the hand. I like to try to chamfer this anyways, but when it cups, you still have to deal with that. So I go back and I deal with this first. If that solves it, wonderful. If not, we then move on to the other 2 spots. Now these 2 spots usually require a chisel and some sandpaper. If we have to go do these parts, you're generally gonna have to refinish the lid. Now for me, that's oil, so I'll just run, a little sandpaper over it at the final end, put some oil on it, a little burnishing, etc., done. But once you have to get into these, it's hard to just spot refinish. So the first thing I do is I generally just sand a little bit and see if that gets me closer. And by closer, you'll notice the closer you're getting, the more it will slide in, and then eventually it will slide in all the way, and that will mean you're done. So I start with the sandpaper to be minimally invasive. And if after the first few times that's not gaining any progress, I reach for the chisel because it's going to take forever to do it with sandpaper. And this gets tricky because we obviously cannot just shave it off forward. The lid lip is in the way. So the way I come in is I come in at a bit of an angle and I slice it off. I kind of come in like that and slice and slice. And that way I can sever it right across this line here and I don't have to have it kind of poking up and out. It's very annoying to try to get rid of if you were to just try and go straight ahead. So angle, slice it off like that. Do an even amount from both sides. Take a few little swipes, go a little bit at a time, check it, come back, etc., until you are done. So I'm gonna go ahead and start doing some of this and we'll see how long it takes us to get there. One thing I highly recommend is that if you have another work surface, you take the box and set this somewhere close but out of the way. The amount of times I've been working on the lid and accidentally hit the box and I had to refinish the box and just a total mess. So I like to set that on a totally separate surface while I work on this. Now these are a little tricky to work on because we obviously have an overhang right here. So we have to elevate this somehow, but also hold it in place. Now there are 2 ways to do this. This is how I've done it every day up until a day or 2 ago when I got these bench cookies on Amazon. I think they're from Rockler actually, but I would just set this on here. I'd get something soft and I would just clamp it straight down to the bench and that allows me to work on it, flipping it around and coming from the other angle for the other side. Whatever you do, however you do it, you just have to get this lip off of the table so that you're not going to hit it over and over again. And we'll just go at it. Now, when you're doing the sanding back here, I generally cover this front. So in case I bang it off of something and then just hold it while I'm doing this. This is relatively simple to go like that. But for the front, for the chiseling, it's got to be on something relatively solid so that you can apply some force to go through it. Now, because of my experience with this and kind of judging where this one is relative to others, I'm already accepting I'm going to have to refinish this top here. I know I'm going to have to remove enough material that it's just going to be easier instead of trying to spot finish to do the whole thing. So I'm going to be a little more aggressive in the back here than I would be if I thought it was only this area back here. So just be aware of that. I'm being a little more aggressive because I know I'm going to have to be refinishing it in the end anyways. But that doesn't mean we don't want to be careful with this front here. We do not want to dent or damage that in any way. And if we can minimize removing material here, some woods, they darken with age, most woods. So this cherry here, this is not the newest box. I built it over the winter. So if I start taking material off of here, it's going to be a different color. It's unfortunate and we try not to do it. This is a pretty dense wood. I forget what it is. It's something exotic. They call it tiger wood, but that's not the real name. So I'm going pretty aggressive here. I'm going to start at 150, see where that gets me. I may crank it down to 60 if need be to speed this up. Gonna need a battery. All right, I'm gonna do my first check. I've got that removed a little under 1/4 inch, but I wanna see if that makes progress, because if it is, then I know I should keep attacking this area further and that it may solve it. Yeah, I gotta keep going there. That's definitely a problem. I may actually need to just hit this whole thing with 150. I probably will do that, to be honest, because it's got a little ways to go. One thing we want to try to avoid is smacking into this as much as possible. You can eventually sometimes start putting divots in it, but since I'm pretty sure I'm also going to have to remove material from here, I am getting relatively close up there to just do some of that now, and then I can do less of it later with the chisel. We're gonna check it again. Okay, we're getting closer. You can see this is sliding in a little further, even though I know I'm still gonna have to do some here. That's definitely helping. We'll grab our piece of paper, and we'd like to go until we just get a little slide under. I'm getting pretty close, at least with this part here, but I still can't get it under there, so I'm gonna keep going. One thing I want to point out here when you're testing this, just be careful with sawdust that will build up here from, especially if you're sanding, or chips if you're chiseling, and that can sometimes prevent it from closing, and you think you have to keep going further and further, but really there's just an obstruction. So always check that. Oh, look at that. We are real close. I'm stunned. I may not have to remove much from here at all. But you can see now it's actually closing, but it's still a little too much force, and I don't have faith that that has solved the problem. I think we've got it better. So I still want to keep going in this case. I'm going to keep sanding a little bit here, and then I'm going to do a little testing up here, mainly because I can feel that one of these sides is a little high, and I'd like to lower that down a little bit, but that's about it. I'm almost there. I wanted to also show the setup for the people who need to remove material. If you don't have a nice vise to clamp things in, this is how I do it personally. One clamp goes on the lid, clamps the other one down, and we've obviously got ourselves keeping this off the ground just a little bit so that we don't crush the thing or damage it. And then I like to come in with a chisel. And again, I like kind of sweeping motions for this because we can't just go off the edge. You can also come in, if you haven't taken a ton off, and just use sandpaper and just kind of fold it up. But I'm just going back and forth, and I'm just sweeping it a little bit at a time. What we want to avoid is gouging it in there and then having to somehow get out. It's a total mess. You can very easily just gouge out a huge chunk of it. God, this wood is really dense. I forgot about that. All right, let's see how it fits. Ooh, that's pretty nice. That's not bad. I can slide this paper in under this side. I still need to take a little bit right off the dead middle, but on either side I'm much closer. And on this side, I can get everywhere except this very front part, which is why I said I know I'm gonna have to deal with that. So let's deal with that now. So I've got this clamped in here. It's not going anywhere. Like I said, I like the 1/2-inch chisel. And I'm gonna come in here and I'm just gonna slide outwards. I hope you can see that I'm going out like that so that then I can slice this off. Delicate situation, which is why we like to get it right in the first place. And we also need to remember how far in our lip goes. It's only about 1/4 inch for me in this case, so I don't have to worry about too much more than that. So I've taken that much off. Now I go test it, and I will then take the equivalent off over there. But I can feel with my finger. And then of course, once we get it pretty darn close, we'll come back in with sandpaper and just rough that up similar to these two areas. One side is easier if you're a lefty, and one is easier if you are a righty. It's a little awkward when you go the other way. And once you think you're getting close, you can come in here with a little sandpaper and just clean that up. And I'm gonna stop this here because you don't need to see me refinish the lid, but nicely closed, fits well, slides nicely. I don't like it to be super floppy because people do sometimes accidentally tip. I like just the lightest bit of pressure required, but that's just me personally. It'll get just a little looser once I go through and sand the rest of the grits here, so it'll end up being just perfect. I want to address one last thing, and that's the nuclear option. And I call it that because it requires the most work to kind of recover from. If none of these things have worked for you, your final option is likely going to be removing material from the bottom here, which will drop the front more. However, when you do that, this front dropping now means these two sides no longer match up, which means you need to come back and sand these to meet nice and flush and feather it down so it's not just like this doot doot. So that's more work, and then you've got to finish that over again. And it's a little more annoying, a little more time consuming. So I consider that the nuclear option. All hope is lost, nothing else is working. I've only had to do it once, to be honest, but I will remove material from the bottom of this and then match these. Now to do this, I highly suggest making some kind of sanding block that will keep this nice and flat and level. What we don't want is to like gouge this out or round this over. Ideally, we'd like it to just be back and forth straight across, and that will get it there. I want to add also that perhaps before you do the final finishing, once you've got it where it slides nicely and you think you're right there, let it sit overnight and see what happens. I have twice had a box where I thought I had it all good. I came back the next day and it was a little stuck still. It's usually just a little, it's not a ton, but it never hurts to let it sit before you go through the whole process of oiling and all of this. Trying to get sanded or oiled wood to sand it off is an absolute nightmare. So consider letting it sit overnight or even a couple days and then coming back. And if it's perfect then and you're satisfied, then go ahead and apply a finish. Hopefully that has solved your problem, whatever it is. If it hasn't, let me know in the comments. Do your best to describe the issue you're getting and tell me which one of these didn't work or which one of them worked a little but didn't continue working so I can try and help diagnose it. All right, have a good one. Bye.